So I was going to the grocery store the other day, and the lady was like, "What are you buying these groceries for?" I'm like, "To eat them." And then the lady was like, "Well, that's a good idea, but I'm not too sure." I'm like, "Why? What's the matter?" And then she's like, "But you're just buying dish soap." Anyways, I was talking to my mom yesterday, and she's like, "Alex, how have you been?" I'm like, "I've been pretty good." And then she's like, "That's good." I'm like, "Thanks, Mom." And then she was like, "Well, how's your money coming along?" And then I'm like, "That's good. I made some money." And she's like, "How have you been making money?" And I'm like, "Well, I've been, doing this and that." And then she's like, "Oh, well, what have you been doing exactly?" And I'm like, "Well, I was just selling some drugs." And my mom's like, "Cool." So I found out the other day I have 6 toes. Not all of the toes are toes. One of them's a not toe. On my birthday, I got a present, and inside of the box was another box. And I was like, "This is the best birthday present." Two days ago, I found out I had to pay my bill in 2 days. One time, I went outside and I was looking at this bird, right? And the bird looked back at me and I was like, "Sup, bird, how you doing?" And the bird this one time, I made sure that, all of my library books were in place. And that's okay, because I like library books. Yesterday, I went to a garage sale. Yesterday, I went to another garage sale. Today, I'm going to go to a garage sale. This one time, I was on an airplane, and they're like, "Hey, would you like some airplane food?" I'm like, "As long as it's from the airplane." So I was talking to myself the other day. I'm like, "Hey, how are you doing?" And I'm like, "Pretty good." And then I'm like, "That's good." And then I was like, "Well, how's your money situation?" I'm like, "It's good, I'm making some money here and there." And then I'm like, "Can I buy some drugs from you?" I'm like, "Yeah, that'd be great. That'll be some money for some drugs, please." The other day, I went outside, and I haven't gone back inside since. So I was walking down the street the other day, and this guy's like, "Hey, can I have some money?" I'm like, "Are you selling drugs?" And then I was like, "Wait, no, that's not how it works." And then the guy's like, "Oh, well, can I have some drugs?" And I'm like, "That'll be some money." That's an impersonation of my dog. That's an impersonation of my cat. That's an impersonation of my bird. This other day I went outside. And I saw my cat and my dog and my bird. And I was like, which one of you said that? The next day I went back inside and I sat in a chair. Someone came up to me and was like, hey, what kind of chair is that? And I'm like, well, it's a pretty good chair. And he's like, cool, can I sit in it? I was like, no, I'm sitting in it right now. And so he went back outside and he found a chair outside and he sat in it, and we were looking at each other through the walls because the walls were glass. So we both got really jealous of each other and our chairs, the outside chair and the inside chair. And then we waved at each other, but it wasn't one of those like good waves. It was sort of like a fuck you wave, but we were both smiling, so it all worked out. So my cat and my dog walk into a bar, and the bartender says, what'll it be, gentlemen? Sometimes I think about how much hair I have, and then I'm like, I think this is a good amount of hair to have. And then my roommates are like, you should get a haircut. I'm like, no, I have the perfect amount of hair on me. And then they're like, well, what are you doing about all of that hair that's constantly growing on you? And I'm like, I don't know. And they're like, you should probably get a haircut or do something about your hair and its growth. And I'm like, well, I think that's a sound judgment. And so the next day I went to the barber shop and I'm like, how much is a haircut? And the guy was like, well, it depends. How much hair do you want to get cut off? And he's just like, it'll be a lot of money if you always want your... And then I'm like, man, I don't want to be around here. You're sneezing. I don't want you sneezing on my hair. And he's like, it'll be free if I'm sneezing on your hair. I'm like, okay, well, my hair's constantly growing and all, so you're gonna have to, you know, constantly cut my hair. And so that's why I have this guy following me around. The next day I went back to the barber shop and he was following me. I'm like, why are you following me to the barber shop? He's like, I don't know. This other time I went back inside and I saw this guy looking at me. I'm like, what are you looking at me for? And he's like, I don't know. And I'm like, how's it going? And he said, pretty good. And then I was like, that's cool. Well, I'll probably see you around later. And he's like, nope, not one bit. And I haven't seen the guy since. This one time I fell out of a tree, but I landed on my feet. Another time I fell out of another tree and I landed on my feet again. I'm like, that's pretty lucky, falling out of a tree twice, landed on your feet twice. So just to try it out again, I climbed up a tree and I was like, I never want to come down from this tree. So I didn't. That's my impression of me. this other time, I was on a school bus. I'm like, wait a minute, I'm not going to school at all. Why am I on the school bus? For all of my life, I haven't really known about what causes the sky to be blue, and the science teacher's like, it's probably... I'm like, that makes sense. Well, it's been great out here, guys. I'll be here next week. Make sure to catch my show, because I think it's pretty good. Yeah, be sure to tip your barber.